Today we're going to talk about adequate housing. So the question I want you to think about is, what is adequate housing? What does that right mean for children? And what should states and communities do to help those children in our communities achieve that? So sometimes the question comes up, adequate housing, does that mean everybody has the right to have a Malibu beach house? As nice as Malibu is, and that would be great, that's not really what adequate housing means. On the other hand, looking at a community like Devari, Mumbai, this is a place of about 520 acres, which is about a fourth-ish of the size of the University of Iowa's campus. It's home to about 1 million people, really scrunched into this very small space. And you can see from this picture, and there's many others I'm sure you can find as well, that there's a lot of challenges in achieving adequate housing for people who live there. So having things like access to clean water, appropriate sanitation, being this close to the trains, for example, would be a big challenge. In sleeping at night, having access to good schools, places to go to work, clean, healthy food would be a challenge as well. You can probably agree that this would not meet the definition of adequate housing. Now, adequate housing is not just an urban problem, it's also a problem in rural communities. Here's an example of a picture of an abandoned home in Ogallala, Nebraska. It's a problem for rural communities as well. And it's not just an international problem, it's also a problem in the US as well. As I mentioned, Malibu, California has very serious adequate housing challenges as well. So if you look at some of the numbers on adequate housing, over 640 million children don't live in adequate housing, which is about a third of the world's children. Really hard to make sense of a number that large, 640 million, that's almost twice the population of the US, in terms of children who don't have adequate housing. So what does that mean for a child to not have adequate housing? What does that mean for their development, for their health? And thinking about, as a child, what you'd like to do. Where did you go play? How did you find friends to hang out with? What did you do during your free time? If you don't have adequate housing or neighborhoods that are safe or places to go play, what does that mean for your ability to socialize and to build those friendships and to live and grow and develop in a healthy way? Along with nutrition, really the children's rights are built on this foundation of the right to adequate housing, because lots of other things are based upon or grow upon that particular right. So if you think about how that right to adequate housing is built on other rights, for example, if you don't have a refrigerator, how are you going to store food? How are you going to prepare food if you don't have an adequate kitchen? How are you going to consume healthy food if you can't store and prepare food in the place where you live? If you're trying to do your homework, where are you going to do homework if you don't have a quiet place, a safe place to sit and study and read and work on your assignments for school? If you don't have door locks or appropriate neighborhood policing protections, how are you going to be safe from violence and predators and crime in your home? How are you going to give your body the rest it needs if you have trains going by, if there's noise, if there's disruptions to your sleep? How will you get your body the rest it needs to heal and grow and develop if your home does not provide those things for you? How are you going to stay warm in the winter in communities where it gets cold at night? How are you going to stay cool in the summer if you don't have adequate heating and cooling facilities in your home? And if you move frequently and have to live in many different places, how are you going to find a chance to build strong community and neighborhood and build relationships with others? How are you going to have friendships and get a chance to goof around and build those kind of relationships? And how will you live out your cultural, spiritual, family rituals, traditions, and events without having a place that allows you to do that? So the housing right is really a foundation of many of these other rights in terms of safety, education, health, nutrition, the ability to grow and make connections with your family and neighbors and things. Those are all really built upon the foundation of having a right to adequate housing. So now this misconception, as I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, that the government has a responsibility to provide amazing, spectacular, wonderful housing for everyone, but that's not really the case. And in fact, governments aren't even required to build housing for the entire population. Now, governments have an important role in ensuring the right to shelter, doing things like preventing homelessness, prohibiting forced evictions, addressing discrimination, ensuring that those that are marginalized and discriminated against have those rights protected, ensuring security of tenure, which means that you're not getting booted out of your housing without legitimate reasons, and guaranteeing that everyone's housing is adequate. So in some situations, that does mean the government will have to build housing, but there's also been other strategies they've used, such as what they call Section 8, where they provide funding so those individuals who can't afford housing on their own can get access to existing houses through rental or purchase assistance. So what does adequate housing really mean? It means that living in conditions that uphold your other rights, such as health and dignity. It gives you protection from forced evictions, arbitrary interference with your health, your family, your home, your privacy, those sorts of things. It means you have the right to choose where you want to live. You don't have to live in a certain area because of who you are, but you have a right to choose where you can live. And you have the freedom to move between different places if you so wish, without government interference. Equity is a big thing in housing protections, making sure that because of who you are, you're not restricted from living in certain areas. Now, obviously, cost is going to be a barrier for many people, but that's also a broader problem with affordability overall. And then you have the right to participate in housing-related decisions about where you'll live, what kind of home you'll live in, what characteristics you want it to have, that sort of thing as well. So it's much more, like I said, than just 4 walls and a roof to have adequate housing. It must do other things as well, like have access to good sanitation, safe water, ability to store food, to prepare food. It must be affordable, so it can't just take all of your money and leave you nothing for anything else that you need to live on. It should be physically safe, so protection from heat and cold, from crime, from other things, from rodents, from infestations that might be affecting your health. Accessibility is something we often don't think about, but it's also an important aspect of your home. So those who use a wheelchair need a place where they don't have to go up and down stairs, for example, to get to the restroom in their home. That's not going to be a really adequate housing for that individual. Free of pollution is another one that we don't often think about. So if you live next to dirty water or unclean air, that's also going to be impacting your health in negative ways. And having access to things that you do during the day, so school, work, healthcare, those kind of things. If you don't have access to those things, then your housing is not adequate. Now, the right to adequate shelter is a natural right. It's something we should have because we're human. But in many places, it's not a legal right, meaning that states, cities, communities are not required to give you housing. And in fact, in many communities, being homeless is increasingly criminalized. So you could get a ticket, a fine, jail time, other court requirements for being homeless. So that makes it much more difficult to actually get out of being homeless if you have fines to pay, court costs, and a criminal record. Iowa state legislators have considered making homelessness illegal statewide and increasing punishments and fines and so forth for being homeless. But it hasn't passed in recent years, but it's something to kind of keep your eye on in coming years, as it's something that's been discussed at the state level for a number of years. Across Iowa, about 17,000 households are estimated to experience homelessness in 2025. And if you look at the numbers in Iowa, about 7,000 children are estimated to experience homelessness at Iowa at some point during the school year. So again, if you can imagine how difficult it would be to be a student, to be homeless and trying to do your homework, trying to keep up with your readings, trying to have a place to store your books at night, to use your Chromebook to do assignments, whatever it might be, how difficult that would be if you're bouncing from neighbor to neighbor, or family member to family member, or different communities, or even being forced to not have a place to sleep at night. So if you look at some of the causes of homelessness and the lack of access to affordable housing and to adequate housing, the primary cause is the lack of affordable housing in communities. There's just not enough housing for everyone who needs to live there. Another cause at the more individual level is drug and alcohol addiction, lack of access to treatment, and the experience of adverse life experiences such as physical or sexual abuse. Johnson County in Iowa is the most expensive housing county in Iowa. So that's one of the most expensive places to be. So we have the biggest challenge here in Johnson County with affordable and accessible and adequate housing for everyone who wants to live here. And efforts to build more housing is often limited by lack of places to build. So there just aren't that many places that have open lots where new housing can be built. There's also zoning rules that limit the type of housing that can be built in different places, often with a preference towards single-family housing, which is more profitable in many cases for developers, but also limits the number of households that can be built given a certain number of acres available. Now, the Iowa City Council is committed to increasing access to affordable housing, but it's still a big problem and there remains a lot of work to be done in this area. So what some other things can be done? Well, in addition to building housing, there's the expansion of voucher programs, which are ways to expand access to expensive housing for families who can't otherwise afford it. We can also increase the minimum wage is another strategy where a lot of families that experience homelessness are working but just can't afford with the wages they have to get the housing that they need. Increasing funding across countries, so higher income countries can contribute toward the cost of building or supporting housing in lower income countries. Zoning policies are a big thing as well. So thinking about what types of properties can be built on what land and how that really influences the access to affordable housing. Housing and building inspections is another important thing that the state does to make sure that housing that is built is safe. It's not going to fall down, not going to burn, not going to have dangerous chemicals in it. So it's another thing that's important for adequate housing for everyone. Avoiding concentrating poverty in a single area is also important, to have a mix of different incomes in each neighborhood. So having a mix of different types of housing together as well is another important strategy for ensuring that neighborhoods have access to all the things that they need. Mental health and substance abuse treatment are also important programs. Sometimes those are overlooked as ways to decrease or prevent homelessness, to make sure that individuals that need treatment for those things are getting access to that. And then developing permanent housing options with support for the long terms to make sure that these affordable and supportive housing options are available over the long term. So there's a whole bunch that goes into adequate housing. It's really a foundational right that builds upon nutrition and housing really go together, and then they're the foundation for all of the other rights that individuals experience. And really for children, it's the core of their experience in terms of thinking about how do you grow and develop in a healthy way if you don't have an adequate place to live. How do you go to school? How do you learn? How do you grow, develop friendships, develop who you are if you don't have a chance to really have a foundational place for a place to live? So it's really a core thing that our communities need to work on and ensure that right is met for everyone who lives here.